assessment. This was 40-some questions. It dealt with 5 different areas, so energy use, transport, diet, waste behavior, so recycling type things, and there's one more, advocacy type things, I think. No, maybe it was just the 4. It was just the 4. And then we gave them feedback. Now, this feedback actually wasn't how they scored. We don't have any idea how to score these things. We didn't know. So we gave them feedback. We told them what their personal scores were, and we varied them to be high or low. And then we told them what the average student's scores were, the average person out there. So we're telling them the norm, what everybody else does. And we told them that that was really high or low. Now think how that happens. If you're both low, none of you create greenhouse gas emissions, it's sort of the norm. It's what we all do. Okay, I'm following the norm. If we're both high, we're damaging the environment, but it's what we all do. No big deal. Traditional norm theory says we just follow the norms in both cases. But what happens when you suck compared to other people? When you're bad compared to everyone else? What happens when your emissions are like way up here and everybody else is down here? Ooh, that's a perfect place to feel guilty, but personally guilty, because what you do is so different from other people, and it's bad. But the opposite, and that's the traditional carbon feedback case, right? Make people feel guilty for the bad things they do that's somehow different from other people. We said, okay, but what if you're so good compared to those other people? So here's the average, here's you, you're down here. Here's the average student. Oh man, look at their emissions. And the question is, does that make us want to do something? Or does it let us off the hook? So we go, whatever, I'm fine. We give them measures of personal guilt. We're actually one of the first studies, surprisingly, to do this, even in other literatures that do this. So we give them a measure of personal guilt. So do you feel personally guilty about your greenhouse gas emissions? You know, the one we just showed you, and we have a check to make sure that they actually did notice what we told them. And then a measure of collective guilt. Do you feel guilty about the university students' greenhouse gas emissions as a whole, which yours is, of course, only one part. And then we asked them a number of these intention measures, and we just pulled out everything we could dream up here, all the way from policies to regulations to conserving energy. We pulled every one we could come up with, because we just want to see if it worked. So here you go, personal guilt. There's a lot to look at here, but I think the thing that really makes the most difference is the arrowed areas. If your emissions are high personally, right? If your emissions are personally high, but your group's emissions are personally low, right? This is a you are bad condition. You do actually get a little bit more personal guilt, just a little bit. I'd like to see it a little higher, but the pattern's generally there. In the other study, it's a little bit higher, so we're okay with it. So that makes good sense. If you're bad compared to others, you feel personally guilty. But look at this one. If you look here, again, the arrows are what matter. If your emissions are really low and other people's emissions are really high, this is the you're doing great condition. Notice how collective guilt is higher. I feel guilty about Americans' greenhouse gas, or students' greenhouse gas emissions. It makes good sense. That's where it should be the highest. It's not high at all when you tell people that they're bad and other people are good. Right? If you pollute a lot more than others, you don't get collective guilt. That doesn't happen. Of course not. It's a personal guilt condition. But you do get this one. So if you tell people they're good, what does this sort of do? Well, your guilt friend is happy because it turns out that the pattern of all of those behavioral things I talked about before, except for, I think, diet. It's very hard to get folks in Wisconsin to want to change their diet practices. That meat and dairy thing, you know, doesn't change so well. But other than that, all the other ones move around in a pattern that looks kind of interesting. That's driven largely by collective guilt, not personal guilt. Okay? And we get this not only in this study, but we get it in the next study. And it turns out that what's driving our behavior is not a sense of not a sense of personal guilt. That, in fact, may be counterproductive. Who feels motivated when they're like, I'm bad? But there may be something that's motivated when you look at that sense of collective guilt. Okay? There may be something going on there, and the carbon feedback paradigm is a perfect place to figure that out. Now, what does this sort of mean for us I kind of asked you a question at the beginning, when is guilt actually good for the environment? And we've done a lot of these studies. I don't even know how many now, 10, 15, 20, I don't know anymore. It's been a long time. But the basic idea that keeps coming out, even in the guilt studies, the personal guilt studies, is that it doesn't seem to help very much to make people feel personally guilty. Now, it may in very, like I said, limited circumstances where you got people who are really hardcore committed to the issue. Yeah, making them feel guilty probably makes sense. But that should make sense to us because your personal values then overlap with the group. So it would make sense that you'd feel personally guilty. I suspect if you measured collective guilt, you'd find it too. Right? So it seems, at least in our studies, that what matters more is drawing on a sense that we are group members. And collectively, these are collective issues. And that based on that group membership, we can feel a sense of guilt that isn't different from personal guilt, except in the sense of what causes it and what outcomes it has, what we want to do because of it. Right? Now, we pitted collective guilt against collective anxiety, and like I said, we've done a lot of anxiety, collective anxiety studies, and the worrying about future generations thing just doesn't pan out. Now, you might say, well, these are a bunch of students. If you did people who have children and grandchildren, maybe you get this. Possibly. We've tried a little bit of that stuff, and we've never gotten it, but truly we haven't had a great test of it. So maybe sometimes it works just great, but we haven't been able to get it to work. Now, of course, our work has limitations, right? We have a lot of students. We've certainly taken flack for that over the years. Yes, we need to measure other people. Yes, students are different in many ways that matter. So yes, absolutely. We know this. Intentions over behaviors. We all intend to do lots of things that we never do, right? So people have said, well, you need to do lots of behaviors. Well, we do have some behavior studies, but they're very kind of low-key things. Like we've had people take buttons that say, stop global warming. But you never get those things that work quite right. I think one study when we did that, we had most people who were, they were either environmentally oriented or they were extremely liberal who wanted to take the buttons. I was like, oh, that didn't help. So, but granted, we need to do a lot more behavioral stuff, and we have cross-sectional data. People say, well, you get people to do stuff in the lab, even if you could. Does that really do anything over time? It's data. Social psychologists don't tend to be very good at collecting. But we know that we certainly need to. We definitely know that. Now, of course, I have to leave you with my thanks, right? Thanks to all of the folks who have contributed to this work over the years. Of course, all of you for coming. Wow. The College of Letters and Sciences, of course, who's helped support this work, not only with this talk, but elsewhere. My lab, students who have worked hard to make these things happen. I can't do everything myself by any means. Nyla Branscombe, my longtime collaborator on this work, and the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research, who has also been very supportive over the years, have been quite helpful as well. But, well, thank you.
Dr. Ferguson will take some questions, and he'll moderate us all. Sure. Yes, sir.
So map this into some concrete things we can do.
Well, I think that if we're trying to motivate behavior, if we're trying to change behavior, I think we need to move a little bit away from trying to create framings that fundamentally make people feel guilty for what they do. Okay, so if you want to get people to do some kind of climate-friendly behavior, don't tell them how bad they are. Don't tell them that there's nothing you're going to be able to do. Give them a message that is more group-based, that we have done these things together, but we can together also do something about it. I think you need to frame it more in group terms than in individual terms, because individual terms not only promote the sense that I'm bad, which immobilizes us, but it also can promote the sense that I am one person in a very big pond, and my pushing the ball up the hill will do nothing. I need help. So I think framing it away from the individual is helpful in getting them to want to do stuff. There could be a lot of reasons why. It could be that it's kind of feels good, in a sense, to be told that you're doing well. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's more of this idea that we together can do something. But whatever it is, I think the framings have to move away from you're the bad person. It could be that we're the bad group, and ironically, that seems to motivate us. Yes, sir.
Are there studies, maybe not the ones you've done, but other studies, that try and focus on those behaviors that you have on the screen earlier, like driving a car, bicycling instead of that, or whatever? Are there some studies that indicate that people would prefer taking those certain actions rather than others?
Yeah, so is it the type of action that matters is sort of the question. Yeah. There are a number of folks who have tried to look at two things. One is, what behaviors should we be doing? Because when we started this in the beginning, we didn't know which ones of these had any effect or not, so we didn't know which ones we should do or not. And the other one was, are some of these behaviors more difficult? And because they're more difficult, they make them unpalatable. People don't want to do them. So yes, there do seem to be behaviors that people are more or less willing to do. One reason is because some are harder than others. At least that's what people suggest. And the other one is some of them are more normative than others. So in some communities, riding the bike is something that we do. There were lots of norm studies showing that you could get people to not litter or to not take wood out of the petrified forest if you had a norm that we do it. Part of what we're suggesting here is that the way that the norms are framed matters. So if I tell you that we're all polluting or we're not, I'm manipulating a norm. So there's also a way I think you can tie that in. So yes, I think it's because of difficulty and because of norms, there do seem to be behaviors that people prefer. I'm always bothered by the difficulty explanation, though, because when you think about difficulty, we know that people are very motivated to do things that are moderately difficult. But if you give them things that are too easy, they don't want to do them. Give them things that are too hard, of course they don't want to do them. They're too hard. So a lot of the environmental literature, I think, makes the mistake, and in psychology makes the mistake of saying, just make it really easy. Make it all easy. If it's all easy, people will do it. No, if it's so easy, it's not worth doing, is how the motivational system tends to react to it. But we got to finish those studies before I can comment too much on that. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just wondering, with the disconnect in your one study where it seemed like you cared more about what happened to Chinese people than Americans,
Yeah.
could that be a Midwestern thing, that we're kind of taught to be more caring about other people's feelings and things?
Maybe. I mean, it certainly could be, and maybe the trick I have with that one is I'm not sure why the other people would be China, right? That's the trick. Why would it be China, not the US? There's one reason I think could be, and one of them would be because harming China is a very public thing. If we've harmed another country, it's very kind of clear and obvious that we've done it. And maybe if we harm ourselves, we either can stuff it under the carpet so we don't notice it, or it sort of doesn't feel as bad because we can take care of that, but those Chinese people maybe not so much. So I think there may be reasons like that, yeah.
I think a lot of us feel that we deserve it.
That we what?
We deserve what we created. We deserve the action, so it doesn't bother us.
Oh, just desserts. Just world. Huh. That's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about that one, but it makes some sense. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Is there any connection with trade relations in these questions?
What do you mean trade relations?
Well, it's really bad that we're going to hurt China.
I don't think I caught that one. What?
The outcome that we hurt China.
Okay, yes.
Is there a link between the economies in terms of trade relations?
Oh, trade relations. Oh.
So that's a big one right now with China.
We don't have any measures like that. But I did think about that today in terms of, I wonder what would happen if we manipulated whether we told them China was in conflict with us, in super competition economically, or if they thought we were wired together economically. So I think I was having the same idea that you're having, that may be playing some role. In fact, now when I think about the comments, some of the comments were things like, we're very positive about China. China is a country that's kicking our butt. China is a country that is to be respected. So maybe some of this, they're thinking of them as either really good or like us in some way that's enviable. So yeah, maybe you're right. Yeah.
Perhaps if you have Chinese Americans asking when the questions are posing, it's harming Chinese people, or if it's Americans and they're approaching Asian American asking these questions, that would be an interesting thing too. And then you have some connection between a group versus like kind of face to face, like when someone's in your face and you know them, or they're living and breathing in front of you, and the potential for harm might seem more tangible.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know that we specifically had a measure of citizenship because we were worried about that very thing with international students, but certainly we don't have any measure of ethnicity, so we don't have no way to test that, but it makes good sense. I was thinking about doing a version with some of my friends in Canada and seeing if we switch it around, if we get the effects we expect here in Canada when it's about Canadians and vice versa. So that would be a fun way to do it. And it's so close to us here, maybe it would actually have an effect. Yeah.
I saw a small similarity to, I come from a big family of smokers.
Okay.
Scaring them about their own individual health, money, anything. But you say you're going to be there and take your daughter down the aisle, and boy, that really gets them out. But that's more about the group, it's about someone else, not themselves.
Exactly.
I don't care if I hurt myself, leave me alone. But then all of a sudden it's like, I just had my first heart attack, and I'm not maybe going to be walking down the aisle or seeing graduate or seeing my grandkids. And it seems to, in some cases, not some, different, but in my family, it seems to be really more good. It's more about the family that, like with alcoholics and stuff like that, they always say, no, it should be individual. They shouldn't do it for other people. They should do it for themselves. So I saw little correlations, in that same, was it me or is it the group or is it the family?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think it's a wonderful example of how collective guilt could arise. Guilt is guilt, but it arises for a different reason and thus has different consequences. So when I was doing the radio show with Judge Finn, he said he recalled a story about a friend he was walking down through New York City with, and his friend threw a popsicle stick on the ground, and he sort of felt a little guilty for not taking action to change his friend's behavior. And that sense of not acting on behalf of what a group member's done is exactly what we're sort of getting at. So inaction may also be a driver of the guilt in the case of if I don't take these behavioral changes to make my health better, that inaction and what it does to the group sort of makes me feel like I want to change. Or maybe the people feel like if they don't change the person in the group, then they themselves are responsible for not causing it. So either way, I think you could get those effects. So guilt for inaction certainly. Or in many cases, action. Yeah, absolutely. They're great examples. Yeah. Yes, sir.
What are your intentions to either dig in or share this on